that a few years ago. Well, more than a few, probably about 12 years ago. Physical fitness comes into play on that. I don't know if anybody heard about they excavated knight's skeleton, 14th century knight in Stirling Castle just recently, and they just did a facial reconstruction of him. And if you go on the internet and look at facial reconstruction and cross-reference it with the Scottish knight, they'll have a picture of it. They can tell from the skeleton, from where the muscles insert on the bone, they get an idea of the muscle tone of the person when they were alive. This Scottish knight, they said, has a physique of a very fit rugby player. Very fit. Well-muscled, built for endurance and strength. Not a skinny little guy with little skinny arms, or something kind of this image we have of knights. Particularly if you look at the tapestries, the illuminations of the period, everybody looks very skinny. That's probably artistic license for the period. These guys were really fit. They had to be really super fit. Obviously, if they survived childhood, they already came out with a pretty good constitution if they were going to survive childhood diseases and illnesses. Plus, when you look at this guy's facial reconstruction, he's got a great big deep scar right across the skull. I mean, it's deep. And that's in the bone. He had a head injury, a serious wound to the head that he had survived and healed pretty well years before his death. He actually died, I believe he died from an arrow to the chest. That's the wound that killed him. So, physical fitness and being physically fit was a big component of their lives. They didn't have to actually sit and think about it too much. I mean, if you're putting on, my kit is fairly close to accurate in weight. It probably weighs, it's not more than 30 pounds, maybe 35 pounds in total. But if you're wearing 35 pounds, 8 hours a day, every day, since you're about 14 years old, you're going to get somebody rather physically fit. The skills of fighting itself, so the training in particular, aren't necessarily dependent on being physically fit. So that is, you can be a really excellent fighter and not actually be in the greatest shape in the world. So there isn't really, particularly for the SCA fighter, there isn't always a real strong motivation to become more physically fit to improve fighting. Because fighting is like anything else, it's a skill set. You learn to adapt the skill set to your physicality, and you can go out and you can accomplish really great things that way. So the motivation to become physically fit, though, for example, comes in as we age. When you're 25, you don't have to do much when you're out fighting. It just all kind of comes naturally. Maybe around 35, you start noticing things getting sluggish. Around 45, you start going, what am I doing? You hit 48, and you go, I've got a squire who's, or a man-at-arms who's 48, and he's like, what am I doing? I'm in trouble. I got to start doing something. You start to notice it. When I was Earl Marshal in Artemisia, the Society Marshal kept coming out with new regulations saying, look, our injury rate is going up and up and up. What's going on out there? Get it under control. And I said, that's because our age rate is going up and up and up. And in athletics and in sports, you see that all the time. To somebody who's worked with athletes, that's no surprise. As we get older, we're going to get more prone to injury if we're not taking care of ourselves. So that's the first motivation to do something to stay physically fit, is as you age, to stay in condition so that you can keep performing at a level that you were at, maybe not in your 20s, but definitely in your 30s. That's something you want to hang on to. And it takes more work as you age to do that. Secondly, we talk about what kind of physicality does this sport really require from somebody. What's the one thing you really have to do well if there's one physicality? Probably endurance. Just the ability to stay in there, keep going. You get into a fight, it's taking longer than you thought. You don't want to run out of wind. You don't want your arms to get tired. You don't want your chest to get tired. You don't want to get tired in the middle of that fight. Same thing if you're in a war. That's a big one in war. If they have a 2-hour res battle, you can fight 15 minutes and then rest for an hour and go out and fight the last 15 minutes. That's what a lot of guys do. This is a lot of fighting in there someplace. So, stamina is another big one that's important. So, stamina and injury prevention, those are the two major things that we look at. Both of those can be accomplished through very specific types of training. When people are doing physical conditioning, they make a lot of really classical mistakes. One of them is people go out to the gym, they go, all right, that's it. I'm overweight, I got bad knees, now my back's starting to go, I'm going to get in shape before I can. They go to the gym, they get on the treadmill, they crank it up to 11, and they run their asses off. They get done, they feel like crap, they go home, and a week later they gain 2 pounds. And they go, what the? I've got to run harder and eat less. So they start doing that more and more often. They get sick, it doesn't work, they feel miserable, they dread going to the gym because it's this torture experiment, and they give up. That's the first classic mistake that most people make, is doing too much too soon. Not knowing what exactly it is when they're trying to do conditioning. So today I'll help try to give you guys some pointers to kind of direct you in a better direction to how you can handle some of these kind of physical conditions. I'm not going to obviously use that guy, that's not a whiteboard, but and I'm not going to use that one because I don't know if everybody's going to, I don't want neck screening all day. So, talking about endurance first of all, really quickly. You have different ways, your body has, let's put it this way, you have one thing that your cells use for fuel. One thing, that's ATP. I'm not going to go into a biochem lesson today, I'm not going to go and draw the Krebs cycle for somebody. Yeah, I know, I'm really glad you guys said really doing you a disfavor. I know you want a biochem lesson. ATP is the only thing your cells use for fuel. It's the only thing. ATP comes from one thing. It comes from glucose, which is blood sugar. That's the only thing it comes from. You get blood sugar from various sources in your diet. You can get it straight, obviously, from carbohydrates. That's the simplest way to get glucose. Some carbohydrates, simpler carbohydrates, sugars, particularly fruit sugars, are already almost blood sugar. They are almost glucose. So those convert very quickly, and they go through this thing, if you've had biochem before, they go through the Krebs cycle, become ATP. They enter the cells, and the cells can use that. Or the cells convert it into ATP, they can use it for fuel. You can get energy from lipids, from fats. Fats are very closely related to carbohydrates. But fats have to go through a very specific process to convert to glucose. I'll talk about that a little more here in a minute. Those two factors, glucose and fat, are the two major sources of fuel for your body. But they're both processed in rather different ways. So when you are putting a demand on your body for energy, your body's going to look at how urgent the need for energy is, how well conditioned you are as to what kind of sources are available to use, and it's going to pick one accordingly. Well, we used to do athletes, we used to do what we call the VO2 submaximal test. Everybody knows what a submaximal test is. You have a cardiologist there for that. We don't do those because we have to have a crash cardiologist because that's taking you to your absolute heart rate, the maximum threshold, to get an idea of what your stamina endurance is. We just run you until you can't run anymore. The VO2 submaximal was designed so that we don't have to take you to your maximum heart rate. What we have is, anybody had one? Anybody had one of these before? You've had one? They put a mask on and it looks like a costume from like G.I. Joe's Cobra guys is what I always thought. Neoprene blue mask, and it has a hose in the front. In the hose there's a little meter, and it reads the chemical composition of your breath. Every time you inhale and every time you exhale, it reads your chemical composition of your breath. And we use those readings to determine kind of what your fuel mixture is. Are you getting most of your glucose from carbohydrates, or are you getting it mostly from fats? And we can actually measure that and read that. So we can take an athlete in, we can look at that, and that can give us an assessment on what they need to do in their endurance training. So we can really actually measure these kinds of things down more than we used to be able to. In fact, when I started training in 2003, the technology still wasn't out yet. It came out in about 2005, 2006, it became more available. We started using it to test athletes to get an idea of what they need to do in their training. Lastly, you can get energy from protein. Energy from protein is difficult because protein's first primary demand in the body is for tissue rebuilding, it's for tissue growth, it's for maintaining healthy tissue. The body doesn't look at protein as a primary source for fuel. What happens with protein is that protein has a nitrogen molecule on it, and to convert that into a carbohydrate, the liver has to break off that nitrogen molecule. And that gets converted into uric acid, so you urinate that out. So actually people who go on the Atkins diet, for example, they'll lose a lot of weight because there's a high metabolic demand placed on the body to convert proteins into carbohydrates for fuel. And so that helps speed up their metabolism, and they start to burn more calories just sleeping, and that helps them drop weight. But if you have a family history of gout, you don't want to be on a high protein diet. because you're probably not going to process that uric acid out. And that's what